Hello everyone and welcome to the weekly Q&A video here on this channel. Oh boy, this is as always part 1 where we're going to deal primarily with NFL questions. Part 2 will come around the bend a little bit later, which deals with questions about the NBA and other sports. And I know that one's probably very heavily dedicated to the NBA, specifically LeBron. So make sure you stay tuned for that one. But let's go ahead and kick off part 1 of this Q&A. Trey Caldwell starts us off by asking, what did you think of Colt Brennan leading up to the 2008 draft? Was it 2008? I think so. I think you're right. Wow, Colt Brennan from Hawaii. I haven't heard that name in a while. You got me laughing thinking about Colt Brennan now. Very productive, system quarterback. Thought maybe he could be a backup in the league for a little while. I didn't know that he was going to be like a big-time starter or anything now because I knew what the reality was. System guy primarily. Colt Brennan, though. I didn't think I was going to do a Q&A today and hear the name Colt Brennan. Awesome Laser. What position would you be most confident in a Division II or Division III player becoming a starter at in the NFL? That is a great question. I mean, technically, if a guy is good enough, they could make it anywhere. But when you talk about D2 and D3 and talk about guys being able to come up through the ranks and being able to grow and develop to the point where they started off not getting a FBS or FCS offer and they went to Division II or Division III, assuming that's where they started and they weren't somebody that transferred because of this or that. But truly talk about they came up through that D2 or D3 program and developed in that D3, D2 program. I would go first with the trenches, offensive, defensive line, because I look like offensive line. If you're 6'5", 320 pounds, you're 6'5", 320 pounds. And you don't have to go to a big-time D1 school to be strong enough at 6'5", 320 pounds to be able to physically hang in the NFL. If you have length, you have length. If you have strength, you have strength. And you can have length or strength without having to go to a D1 program. So if you can teach the guy NFL-level technique and you can get him to work on his feet, you have a chance, a pretty good chance. You know, specifically talk about tackles, but even for interior linemen as well. And defensive line, you know, if you're big, you could maybe play the run, and that's enough to be able to become a starter in the league. I look at the trenches and I say, because size is size, and size translates. And if you're 300-something pounds at D3, you could be 300-something pounds in the NFL and stay at that position. Maybe the other position outside of the box might be safety, and the reason I say that is you could take a kid that plays D2 or D3 as a corner, and maybe they run only a 4.6 40, and they're not fluid enough in the hips, they're just not quick enough to be able to hang full-time outside, but let's say they have good instincts and awareness and feel for the game, they're a physical type of player, they're a solid tackler, they can translate as an in-the-box strong safety or as a free safety. So when I think about it, those would be the areas, offensive, defensive line, and then the safety position, I think, would allow for the easiest transition from D2 or D3. Not saying other players at other positions can't. Pierre Garcon had a pretty nice career coming out of Mount Union, which was a D3 school. Danny Woodhead came from Chadron State. What are they, Division III or NAIA? So it can happen. Top-tier tape. If you're Nick Saban, would you start Tua or Jalen this season? You have to start Tua, don't you? Is this even a discussion? I mean, Tua is the guy that came in the second half and led you to the national championship. It's got to be Tua time. Alex Saida, is Mitchell Trubisky a legit franchise quarterback? Because I have my doubts, even though his supporting cast wasn't great last year. Yeah, I think it's fair to question because based off of what you saw in the 12 starts last year, you did not see enough that indicates he's automatically going to be a franchise quarterback. Now, you also have to provide full context. He had to deal with John Fox and Dowell Loggins constructing the offensive game plans, and we know how disastrous that could be to a young quarterback like a Trubisky. He also lacked help around him on the offensive side of the ball. It's really, really hard to judge Trubisky based off of last season. Really, really hard. So I have my doubts, but I also have my hopes. And we are going to start finding out with the superior offensive mind running the show for him and Matt Nagy, and the superior offensive talent you will have around him in 2018, you will start to get an indication of what type of quarterback Trubisky can or cannot be in the NFL. Drake Maddox, if you had one defensive play you needed to make to win the Super Bowl, who do you take? This is a good question. Brian Urlacher, Ray Lewis, Javon Curse, or Reggie White? That's fascinating that you threw in the freak Javon Curse there. Doesn't belong in that list, but I have no problem giving Javon Curse some love. Urlacher, Ray Lewis, Reggie White. The correct answer would be Lawrence Taylor. But out of the guys that you provided, you also didn't throw in Ronnie Lott. Out of the guys you provided in terms of the defensive side of the ball, on that list, I'm going with Reggie White. Because when in doubt, you go with the best defensive player. And the best defensive player on this list is Reggie White. Henceforth, it is Reggie White that I would go with. But he's not the best defensive player of all time. But Reggie White was a magnificent player. He was an absolute stud. He was unbelievable. Falcons Fury. How would you evaluate Dan Quinn as a drafter? I wouldn't, because last time I checked, Thomas Dimitroff is the general manager, and he has the personnel control, and I thought he was the one running the draft. Now, when you talk about the philosophy and the approach and the type of players that Dan Quinn is envisioning working in lockstep with Dimitroff, I think the results have been positive so far. You have to like where they're heading as an organization. Meet Beto Clock. Do you think John Gruden actually knows what the fuck he's doing? I'm not sure. It is a great question, and we are going to find out the answer very, very soon, aren't we? I don't know if I've liked what I've seen, but we can also be proven wrong. Josh Grantham, which NFL secondary has the best chance to be the next Legion of Boom? I think in part because of the defensive line that they play behind, because of the talent that's already there in that secondary. I look at the Jacksonville Jaguars with Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Boye. Now you throw in a Ronnie Harrison into the mix. You've got Barry Church there. Not quite as good as the Legion of Boom, mind you, but if you're talking about the next Legion of Boom type of secondary in the league, like they could be the best for a couple of years as a crew, I think it's the Jacksonville Jaguars. BJ asks, do you buy the Rams hype? Not totally, no. Because I don't typically like when teams that I feel were a few players away try to totally dive into the trade and free agent market and specifically bring in a bunch of guys that have been problems in head cases in their previous destinations. Sisu, Talib, Peters. That worries me a little bit. So I'm not totally sold on the Rams hype just yet. And can the Tennessee Titans make some noise? I mean, honestly, didn't they make noise last year? They made it to the playoffs. They won a road playoff game, coming back from 21 down. I mean, that's a little bit of noise. I get what you're saying. Can they make more noise? They might be a year away. But they need more out of Mariota if that's going to happen. Spencer_Carbon asks, what did you think of Phillip Rivers coming out of NC State? Phillip Rivers at that time in 2004 in that draft class, I thought he was the most pro-ready quarterback. And the number 2 quarterback in the draft behind Big Ben. My big board was Big Ben, Phillip Rivers was right there, and then another step or two down was Eli. Because I thought if you took the last name off the jersey of Eli, there's no way in the hell you could evaluate those quarterbacks and think that Rivers and Big Ben were behind him. There's just no way. As far as Rivers, I think part of your question was also about concerns about the throwing motion. I didn't like the throwing motion, but he was so productive with that throwing motion, I didn't see why it couldn't translate to the NFL. I worried about how well it would translate if he had to be moved off his spot and throw on the move. But when you saw Phillip Rivers, you knew this guy had stud potential. So I was high on him coming out of NC State, yes. Our Genie's comeback. Where is Dak's career headed? Is he headed down the path of an Andy Dalton type of guy, or will we see more of what we saw out of Dak as a rookie? I think that's a great question because it's fascinating to me how we've automatically assumed maybe because he's playing in Dallas that after 2 years that Dak Prescott is an unquestioned franchise quarterback, and I don't think that's the case. There are things to like. There are parts of his game that you feel like could be that, but he's not the greatest physical talent, and his production last year was okay, but nothing special. Getting Des Bryant out of there will help. Having Ezekiel Elliott back for hopefully a full season certainly will help. Having an even more improved offensive line is certainly going to help. I feel like the needle's pointing up on Dak Prescott, but we should not, to borrow a phrase from Bill Parcells, break out the anointing oil just yet. Matt Montmini, who is the biggest mark for themselves in the NFL? Ooh, Great question. Biggest mark for themselves in the NFL. Roger Goodell. How about that? Cloud. Who do you predict will be in the top 5 quarterbacks discussion in 5 years? 5 years, top 5 quarterback discussion, go. Okay, I got to break this down a conference at a time, and I'm also trying to factor in who will still be in the league in 5 years, where everybody will be in 5 years, so give me just a second. Top 5 quarterbacks in the league in 5 years. If he's healthy, Andrew Luck. If he's healthy, Deshaun Watson. I'm thinking. Derek Carr. Carson Wentz, and maybe Jared Goff. I honestly, I got to think about that a little bit more before I could really answer it, because there are other young guys too. Also, you got to throw in Aaron Rodgers in 5 years, could still technically be playing, so he might be top 5. Matt Ryan in 5 years could still be playing. He could technically be top 5. I would actually need more time to think about that question. That's actually a really good question, and you guys can participate. Answer the question in the comments. Jeff Seago, with Matty Ice now over 40,000 career passing yards and being in the league a decade, how do his Hall of Fame chances look? I don't honestly know, Vinny, that people look at Matty Ice as a Hall of Fame type of quarterback. I think they look at him as a pretty good to very good quarterback, but not necessarily a great quarterback. Another 7 really productive years with a Super Bowl appearance again. Would make 2 Super Bowl appearances, maybe if he actually won a Super Bowl. That might put him over the hump. I think Matt Ryan is going to be one of those guys that the appreciation for his career will come after the fact. The trick with using just solely the numbers is that we throw so much in the NFL now that 4,000 yards doesn't mean nearly as much as it used to. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer now. I don't think that he's that close. But I don't want to completely close the book because, again, if he has several more really productive seasons and the Falcons are in contending position, and especially if they win a Super Bowl, you will see that narrative and discussion point change, and he will start to be considered in that light, I do believe. And then he also asked, how many years of dominance do the Patriots have left? I think however many years Tom Brady is their quarterback and Bill Belichick is their head coach. So maybe 1 more, maybe 2, but that's it. The window is closing, and it's almost slammed shut. Peter Jedra, any chance Vince McMahon enjoys some level of success with his new football league? History says no, and I'm not just talking about Vince's history with the XFL or anything like that. I'm just saying history of a second football league. Yeah, you could go way back in the day and say the AAFC, you had the Browns merge in, and they came in and took the NFL by storm. And you can also talk about the AFL and how they were able to force a successful merge with the NFL. But World Football League, USFL, XFL, UFL, all these other football leagues that have been tried over the past 40 years have largely failed and failed miserably. So the odds just are not in his favor. They just aren't. Lawrence Grani closes out this Q&A by asking any chance that RG gets a starting job in the NFL in the future. And what I love about this is we no longer refer to him as RG3 or Robert Griffin III or Robert Griffin. We just call him RG. Like, that's his name. He has to own that, RG. Not good. Lots of teams have invested draft picks in recent years on quarterbacks. There are other guys like, I would rather take a chance on a Teddy Bridgewater than I would an RG3. Maybe Kaepernick at some point gets a chance. I would take a chance on him over an RG. I don't think the chances are very good. He might still be able to have a decent career for himself in jumping around from team to team as a backup and still make decent money and still hang around the league, and maybe he gets a chance to show something, and you never know. But right now, not very good chance. But anyways, that's it for this Q&A. Thanks to all of you that submitted your questions. Make sure you tune in to part 2 coming up soon.